Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into a genuinely fascinating operational manual. Now, what makes this text so interesting is that it frames national strategy not through the usual ideological lens, but through a highly rigid, quantified framework. Whether we're talking about global geopolitics, economic security, or emergency response, this document tries to strip away all the politics and simply treat leadership like a strict sequence of operational checklists. So let's unpack exactly how it works.
Here's our roadmap to decode this acronym. We'll be heading the TMQ principle, tech and reliability, unity and management, priority and foresight, and finally, the ultimate willingness. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The TMQ principle. To really get a grasp on this blueprint, we have to start at the engine room. This is the master principle powering every single policy recommendation in the text. The manual hits on this core idea called the one thing. It basically argues that the real difference maker in global leadership isn't some hidden magic trick or having the perfect PR strategy. It's just the willingness to execute the obvious tasks sitting right in plain view. It's about cutting out the noise, dropping the endless debates, and taking direct action on what is self-evidently broken. Sounds simple, right? But it's actually a pretty profound shift in thinking.
And that brings us to the heartbeat of this whole thing, the TMQ loop. Target, meet, qualify. First, you target the blindingly obvious problem. Second, you meet it head-on with decisive, visible action. And third, and this is crucial, you qualify the win with hard numbers, because in this playbook, if you can't measure the improvement, you didn't actually do the job.
Moving on to Section 2, Tech and Reliability, the T&R of the acronym. Let's look at how that TMQ loop applies to technology and the economy, operating on the premise that global leadership will always follow technological leadership. Think about stuff we absolutely rely on, like semiconductors. The manual points out how incredibly fragile it is to depend on just a single foreign factory. It treats putting all your essential chips in one distant overseas basket as a massive systemic risk. The obvious, self-evident fix? Build domestic redundancy. Dual source it. Make it at home so you aren't left vulnerable.
To enforce this mindset, the text uses what it calls one-line qualifiers. They're sharp and honestly pretty unforgiving. If essential programs depend on a single foreign node, the obvious task, redundancy, was not done. It strips away all the nuance. It doesn't care how many task force meetings you had. If you're still relying on one supplier, you've failed the mission.
So what does reliability actually look like in practice? According to this doctrine, it's an operational habit. It means locking down the energy grid so blackouts just don't happen. It means dual sourcing supply chains so factory lines never stop, and aggressively cutting the red tape that slows down small businesses. Basically, the goal is to be the partner who actually delivers the goods while everyone else is still making excuses.
Next up, Section 3, Unity and Management, the UNM. What's really wild here is how the framework groups foreign alliances right alongside homeland security, treating both of them strictly as management exercises. It completely removes the emotion from diplomacy and the panic from crisis response.
Let's look at the united pillar. In this framework, alliances aren't about warm and fuzzy historical feelings or giving grand speeches. They're treated as daily checklists. The manual argues that alliances decay if they're neglected, so they demand shared technical standards, joint cyber defense drills, and highly structured maintenance. You're basically engineering the teamwork by design, long before a crisis ever hits.
And here's the kicker. Unity requires fairness you can actually quantify. It effectively treats diplomacy like a spreadsheet. The manual insists collective defense is mathematically impossible if one nation carries all the financial weight while others just coast. If the burden-sharing math doesn't balance out, the alliance is deemed operationally flawed.
Bringing it back home to management, the text maps massive, high-level systemic threats directly to measurable TMQ actions. Whether it's the invisible threat of a cyber attack, a porous border, or a fragile power grid, it strips away the ideology completely. It just assigns a cold, hard technical action step to neutralize the vulnerability. To put this into perspective, let's look at disaster response. The manual pushes for the Incident Command System, or ICS. The goal here is that whether it's a firefighter, a soldier, or an electric company rolling up to a major disaster, every single agency is literally speaking the exact same operational language and reporting through the exact same hierarchy.
Check out this one-liner. If responders argue channels, the obvious task, interoperability, was not done. That perfectly captures it, right? If your emergency teams show up to a disaster and can't even get their radios to talk to each other, leadership failed, the most basic prep test.
In this system, improvising during a crisis isn't heroic, it's just a failure to plan. Moving on to Section 4, Priority and Foresight. This is all about anticipatory governance, looking ahead, buffering systemic risk, and relentlessly clearing the runway for the builders.
But this raises a massive structural question when you're trying to shift from a culture of bureaucracy to a culture of building. How do you actually hack through that bureaucratic friction without accidentally tossing out critical safety rules? We all know red tape strangles innovation, but we still need guardrails to prevent real harm. So how do you figure out what to prune?
Well, it offers a pretty ruthless three-step fix. First, you eliminate. If a required signature adds zero value, just cut it. Second, improve. If a rule is necessary but confusing, rewrite it so it makes sense. And third, digitize. Stop doing repetitive manual paperwork and automate it with a portal. It's an aggressive operational deep clean.
And remember the qualify part of the TMQ loop? The metric for success here is super specific. You only get a win if the median wait time for citizens and businesses is literally cut in half, 50%. If getting a building permit used to take 120 days and now has to take 60 days or less. Otherwise, the whole initiative is a bust.
The text lays it down like this. If processes grow without output gains, the obvious task, pruning, was not done. By focusing purely on measurable time saved, the doctrine argues that performative process is just a sign of failed priority. A bigger government department or a more complex form doesn't mean better results. It usually just means slower delivery. You have to relentlessly prune the dead branches to get any real growth.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate willingness. Let's pull back and look at the macro level to see how all these pieces fuse together into one unified strategy.
So we've got technology, reliability, united, management, and priority. Whether you're standing up an AI team or hardening a physical border, this entire acronym is essentially a ranked to-do list powered by the willingness to act. The underlying argument is that while specific challenges change, the required response is almost always sitting right there in plain sight. The true edge belongs to the leader who is willing to execute without waiting around for perfect consensus.
The coolest takeaway here is that this TMQ loop is supposed to scale, from a national government all the way down to a business or even your own house. Which leaves us with this thought. How might we apply this exact blueprint to our own challenges? What is the glaring, self-evident task sitting right in front of you today, and do you have the willingness to simply target it, meet it, and qualify it? Thanks for tuning into this explainer. I hope it gave you a crystal clear look into this highly structured way of thinking.